Have you ever wondered if you were getting cheated on what you were paying for? Well, Jesus tells a strange parable about a shady manager that shows us something deeper. In God's kingdom, what looks like waste is actually grace. Squandering becomes scattering mercy, forgiving debts, and building eternal relationships. Join us as we discover why God's business model runs on love, not ledgers. Come see why reckless grace is the best news ever. Have you ever seen the pictures of old service stations or gas stations? They had a little tower or two with glass containers on top. It had marks for gallons on it. You could see the whole thing and how much you were getting. I suppose someone could have put the marks in the wrong places to cheat, but by and large, you could see what you were getting. Today, we put a nozzle in the car and a digital screen tells us how much we got. We never ever see it. How on earth do we know it's fair? There's actually a whole department that checks that accuracy of the pumps. The Department of Weights and Measures. They've caught numerous acts of the public getting shorted on dispensed stuff. It's actually a phenomenon going all the way back to the Old Testament and beyond. Those that make the ephah smaller and the shekel heavier and practice deceit with false balances, buying the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, and selling the sweepings of the wheat. You see, in modern times, it's misset pumps and not enough ketchup in your bottle and stuff like that. We feel cheated when that happens. And that's exactly the feeling we get about the manager in Jesus' story today. The manager is accused of squandering the master's property. Now that word, squander, it comes from an old word that means to scatter, to spread, to throw around. Not just wasting, but dispersing recklessly. Imagine tossing coins into the wind. That's what the manager was accused of doing with someone else's money. Well, today's parable comes right after three other stories or parables: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son. Each one celebrates a kind of wastefulness. A shepherd leaving 99 for one. A woman tearing apart her house and throwing a celebration for one coin. A father running out to embrace the son that had gone off the tracks and blew his whole inheritance. None of that makes good business sense. But in God's kingdom, that is exactly what makes sense. So when Jesus introduces this shady manager, he's not suddenly switching topics. He's deepening his point. In God's economy, what looks like reckless waste might actually be the point of it all. The manager has been caught squandering. It doesn't say stealing. He knows he's getting fired. And here's where we get a weird line. I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. You see, that line kind of bugged me all week. I had to think about it because it feels too noticeable to ignore. Why does Jesus include it, especially if he's the unjust steward? I think not all of it is meant to be lined up exactly metaphorically. I think this points to us in the role that Jesus is trying to get us to embrace with the parable. On one level, it's just the steward's self-awareness. He can't muscle his way back with hard labor. He can't grovel his way back through shame. He's stuck. Isn't that the moment we all face before God? We can't dig our way into the kingdom by sheer effort. We can't beg our way in by wallowing in shame. So what's left? The only way forward is to turn outward, toward mercy, toward forgiveness, toward relationships. That's exactly what the steward does. He goes to the debtors and starts slashing what they owe, not out of nobility, but because that's the last option. And yet, in that moment of desperation, he stumbles into the logic of grace. It reminds me of a student who's in danger of failing. In this case, digging their way out by cramming all night isn't a possibility, and neither is begging their way to a passing grade by pleading with the teacher. The only real way forward is relationship, owning the problem, seeking some help, receiving maybe mercy, finding a new way to learn. Things like tutoring, office hours, study groups, or mercy like a professor who offers the grace of an extension or a retake. Not just relying on ourselves, but humility, mercy, and relationship. That's us with God. Works ain't going to save us. Shame won't save us. Grace does. So with all this, what's the boss do? He doesn't say, "Well done, you noble servant," like in other parables. He says, "That was a pretty clever move." He commends the steward's shrewdness, his decisiveness, his urgency, his boldness. That's when Jesus tells us, man, the children of this world are more shrewd with their own generation than the children of light. In other words, even shady characters know how to hustle for their survival. So why don't we show the same urgency and enthusiasm for the causes of God's kingdom and our eternal home? Jesus tells us, y'all need to be making friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth. That is, be merciful with it and sharing, so that when it's gone, they may welcome you into eternal tents. The Greek word used here is tents, or tabernacles, actually. Think of Israel in the wilderness, with God dwelling among them in a tent. It's not just about finding a couch to crash on. It's about lasting fellowship with God. So the point is not be shady. The point is be urgent, be bold, invest in relationships of mercy, because that's what lasts forever. This is where the word squander gets redeemed. Because if the steward squandered wealth, then Jesus squanders righteousness. He scatters it recklessly. Remember his parable about the gardener scattering handfuls of seed even where it might not grow? That's Jesus' forgiving debts, healing the undeserving, searching endlessly, welcoming prodigals home. That's the call for us too. Scatter blessings, forgive debts, invest in people. Being squanderous, so to speak. We all have unique ways of being. We all have different gifts. Sometimes the world says you're wasting time with your passions, your routines, your unique way of being. But in God's economy, that time can be the very thing that connects us to others and builds deep relationships. It's like Morty says, perhaps you were born for such a time as this. There are individuals, churches, traditions, and cultures that have shown us how to make abundance out of scarcity, how to feed people who can't pay you back, how to build a community that runs on grace and not on cash. That's kingdom squandering. Jesus is clear. You can't ride two horses with one rear end. You can't run both economies at once. If money, wealth, possessions, or power have the power to force our decisions, hear that again, have the power to force our decisions, that is what mammon is. Mammon says, hoard, calculate return on investment, protect what's yours. The kingdom, however, says scatter, forgive, risk, and give. And Jesus is clear. Choose your horse. You can't serve God and mammon. The thing is, in God's kingdom, our logic is completely flipped. What looks like wasted time is eternal gain. What looks like reckless grace is God's justice. What looks like squandering is God's wisdom. Think of a grandmom praying for a struggling child for 20 years. World's perspective, wasted breath. God's perspective, however, eternal investment. Thankfully, different people have squandered kindness on me when I haven't deserved it. They gave me patience I hadn't earned, mercy I hadn't asked for. I know that it has made all the difference. Not all the seeds took root. I'm sure some felt like they were landing on hot concrete. But that's grace. That's love. That's mercy. It messes up the books. It ruins the bottom line. But man, thank God it does. Because that's the only reason you and I will be welcomed into those eternal tents. So, go and squander some serious righteousness. Scatter mercy. Forgive freely. Waste time in love. Because that is how God does business. Amen.